Title of next session is Deciphering Fraud Attacks and Reinventing Authentication. For the speaker, we have Ashish Jain, CTO of Arcos Lab. Please welcome him.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Last day of the conference and at noon at lunchtime. So either you are really passionate about this topic or I owe you some money. Regardless, welcome to the session. My name is Ashish Jain. I'm a CTO for a company called Arcos Labs. We do bot management, fraud detection, and account security, and get to work with companies like Twitter and Snap and Adobe and OpenAI and Microsoft and many others. Prior to joining Arcos, I used to lead identity, risk, and trust teams at eBay, where the charter of the team included registration, authentication, account management, payment and account fraud, KYC, AML, all cancellations, disputes, and a number of things. So definitely got some of kind of my learnings and challenges of working with a company in that kind of fraud. And I'm here to share some of that learnings and thoughts with you, and hopefully you will get something out of the session. Now, before I kind of get into it, I want to get started with just how this community has kind of come together and how identity has evolved. If you think about it, this community came together in the 2000 time frame, and the first time we built something called the Liberty Alliance framework. In fact, some of the same people who are involved with the FIDO Alliance, and put together a framework for different types of use cases. Web, there was no mobile back then, but proxies-based, front-end architecture, back-end flows. Eventually, we came to SAML 2.0 in the February 2005 timeframe for browser single sign-on scenarios. We built OAuth in the 2010 to access API controls, combined the browser flows and the API flows into a single motion with OpenID Connect, and coming to the point today that around passkeys that you may or may not have heard in the last few days. And then we still have a few more things to do going forward around mobile wallet and DID, as you heard in the previous session. If you think about most of the things that we have done in the last 20 years and the content of the session for the past 2 days, we have been primarily focused on the good users. What can I do to make the experience of a good user as frictionless as possible for my website? And the KPIs that we normally look for includes things like sign-in success rate. It includes things like how much time does it take for a user to sign in, how many people showed up, how many people completed. And the primary endpoints that we focus are registration, login, and account recovery. Now, what we do not realize that these are also the 3 most attacked points in any enterprise. So you have a separate section within your enterprise which are focused on the same 3 endpoints, but their KPI and metrics are very different than yours, because that include account takeover, chargebacks, number of cancellations, and disputes. And similarly, how this industry continue to kind of work together to focus on the good actor, there is a separate set of people who continue to focus and help the bad actor, and they have their own roadmap of how they evolved over the last 20 years. And started as a simple kind of a curl script, eventually have many open source tools like OpenBullet, Sentry MBA, and all that, and evolved into where we are today, where there are very, very sophisticated attacks that I will talk about in a second. If you think about it, like you can download, there are open source plugins that you can find for SAML, OAuth, and even for passkeys. You can find open source tools and software. One of them is called Sentry MBA. Rachel in the opening keynote showed where you can get a username password combo list. There is other places if you search for Pastebin and find a variety of things. You go to a tool like this, enter the URL, cut paste the combo list, and then you can keep it running, and you will get a good amount of success where you can break the passwords for many of the end users. At some point of time, when you run that into volume, you're going to come across something like a CAPTCHA. There are CAPTCHA solver services. If you can see, it's about 50 cents for 1,000 CAPTCHAs. It has now gone up to about $1 for 1,000 CAPTCHAs. But regardless, you will find plenty of services that you can subscribe. You can pay as you go, or you can have an annual subscription to bypass the defenses that your websites have put together. If you have a little bit less time and looking for prioritized templates where you don't have to figure out the URL of the website, you're looking for a community to support how to attack together better, there's a new tool called OpenBullet, completely free, open source, great community around it. Again, same way to be able to attack the website. There is a free plugin, and all the tools I'm showing you so far are free, open source. And the benefit of these tools is that in addition to all these tools, they come with a fairly decent amount of community. We kind of came together, we have FIDO Alliance, we have Oasis, we have W3C, where we all come together to talk about it. There is plenty of Discord and Telegram channels where all the other bad actors get together to discuss the exact same thing, exact same 3 points, but have very different KPIs of how do I break the site. And we have an expo hall. There are a bunch of companies that we have here to be able to protect it. There are also virtual expo halls where they actually tell you that if you want to buy cheaper compute only for a weekend, if you want to buy residential proxies because you want to be able to bypass the IP reputation rules, there are companies like FraudPass, which allows you to buy IP spoofing and device spoofing. So there is a number of players, Mind Proxy, Residential Proxy, Renter. There are a bunch of places where you can buy services and rent them and have discounts and sales as you expect into any other business. Now, one interesting comment Derek from Ubico made yesterday in a keynote is that we have to build standards for everyone and everywhere. Right? That is the bar we have set as this community to put these standards. If you put a fraudster's hat, they do not have to build these standards for everyone everywhere. They need to be able to only find one hole, one segment of your users to be able to attack. You have a 10 million audience in your user base. They get 1% break. That is still 100,000. So they do not need to build a solution. Andrew mentioned it took 60,000 hours to bring to FIDO Alliance and Passkey to where it is today. This is when we have not even started the adoption completely. I can guarantee you that each one of you, depending upon how your flight is, you can download any of those open source tools and have it up and running by the time you land where you came from. This is how easy and the barrier to entry has reduced for you to be able to attack. We came together and we said the users have to stitch a number of things. You need SSO, you need API access. I have a separate SAML IDP, I have a separate OAuth AS, I need a SCIM protocol, I also need authentication. What can we do together as an industry to make life easier? And we put something called identity as a service. Gartner had an MQ on it, a bunch of companies compete and play in that, and we continue to evolve. The other side of the house had a very similar idea. Why not reduce the barrier to entry even further? Why do I have to ask you to figure out where to get a headless browser? Where do you get to be able to proof a fingerprint? Why do you have to go and figure out where to buy the CAPTCHAs? Why don't I put this together into a single option called cybercrime as a service? The first kind of incarnation of this was something called Genesis Marketplace. It was taken down by FBI earlier this year, but the concept was very simple, which is in addition to giving you a way to attack credentials, why don't I also give you hijacked sessions and cookies and stolen financials? Why don't I have a built-in device fingerprint spoofing scenario and also have a built-in browser so that I can fake the fingerprints the way I want to? And this became very, very popular. And earlier this year, we saw something called Evil Proxy, subscription-based service. Rachel showed a demo yesterday where she called somebody and they asked for a PIN code. And then, so she entered the credentials with a password, called the guy, asked for a PIN code, and then they entered the PIN code. And I was about to say that this is so last year, because you can actually completely automate the process because they offer a reverse proxy where they collect the password in real time, play it against the origin website, ask for a 2FA to the end user, no human involvement required, and then play it against the origin websites. Once you have an authenticated session, then you can transfer that to wherever you want to. And then you don't have to figure out at runtime if the person has enabled security key, because these guys take care of solving all that. And there's a $400 per month subscription service, and they keep it up to date across all the major websites that you can go and attack. So this is how simple and easy it has become for them to do. In the last 6 months, I'm sure you have seen that because of the LLMs, a lot of companies are trying to train their own models. Similarly, that fraudsters are trying to do it. So scraping has become a big use case. New websites have come up to be able to help you with scraping. This goes back to the same thing. How can I combine everything into a single offering so that I can make it easy? They allow you to get 3 credits. You can pay even in crypto, 3 credits to buy a CAPTCHA tool, You want to buy a residential proxy, 5 credit within the same tool, and they have dedicated documentation and pages on each of the tools that you would be able to protect against them. So there's a dedicated page on Akamai, on Cloudflare, every WAF vendor of how do you get past this and, and skip those controls. If I kind of break into everything of the different types of attacks in a very high level, I can put them into 2 buckets, volumetric and low and slow attacks. What Pam showed in the keynote 2 days ago of Microsoft is having 4,000 credential stuffing attacks per minute. That is a very typical example of a volumetric attack. In that case, I'm not looking for a high reward. My KPI is just the conversion rate. Like I said, if I can get 1% of a 10 million, that is good enough and enough ROI for me to continue my operation. The second type of attack, which is what Rachel showed yesterday, which is the concept of I'm going to call somebody. It takes time. I have to build the trust before you can send me your PIN. And in some cases, there are different types of attacks I will talk you through. They are low and slow. They are more sophisticated. They take more time, but the rewards are equally higher. The example of the volumetric attacks, I'm sure these are all public news, so you may have paid attention. North Face, 200,000 attacks leaked. This happened twice in a year to North Face. Anytime there's a credential breach which happens anywhere, eventually the next day you can find those username and password combo list, and you can use the tools I mentioned above and give it a very simple try. PayPal shared publicly that they had 4.5 million fake account registrations. There are multiple ways fraudsters can monetize fake accounts. For instance, if you are a storage or a compute company, I can use that free storage to do crypto mining. If you're an e-commerce retailer, I can make, you give me $5 off to create a new account. I make a $1 million account, get the $5 off, never come back as a buyer. If I'm a gaming company, I can come in and I can spam the other users. Social media company, I can create a $1 million account, sway the public opinion on a specific topic. So there are a variety of ways I can attack it if I can create fake accounts in volume. The third example, just a DraftKings. This is an 18-year-old person from Wisconsin. If you listen to his interview, he thought it was fun, and he, again, downloaded the free open source tool. $600,000 is what he got in, and didn't realize he was doing anything wrong. He thought it was, so easy. Let me try this experiment. Next thing you know, I have a business. I'm sure you all heard of the Taylor Swift. There were 3 billion active attacks on the day, or sessions the day the ticket sales opened, the site crashed. In their defense, they did ask as a prerequisite that you have to create an email-based account. They also ask for email-based verification so that not anybody can create an account, except all the fraudsters 2 weeks ago created the account. The moment the ticket sales opened, bot picked up, and they had 3 billion sessions in the first 5 minutes, having the site to be crashed. So this is essentially the examples of the volumetric. If I come back to the social engineering types of attacks, and this is, Rachel showed some of the examples yesterday. The first one I bring up is called romance scam, focused on lonely and elderly people. Start with a simple text or a WhatsApp message by saying, I can guarantee you 80% of this room have received some unknown text or a WhatsApp message in the last 1 year. Very simple attack, takes some time to build some trust, and eventually I'm going to ask you for some money. Second one is called as the grandparent scam, where you will receive a phone call from your granddaughter or grandson saying, I'm in trouble. I was driving the car. I hit a woman. She's pregnant. I'm in trouble. Can you send me $5,000? It actually happened to one of our customers. And of course, all these scams, they said, please don't tell the dad because he will be upset. So they, again, focus on grandparents. The third one is called big butchering. It is a combination of the romance scam and the crypto investment scam, where you do the same thing, create a connection, and then ask the victim to create or invest into a crypto app. You get some initial wins, and over a period of time, then you wipe out the whole earnings. This lady lost $450K. There was a big article on CNN, a person who lost 1.5 million entire life savings started with a simple text by saying, are you feeling lonely? The business email scam, a demo of that was given by Rachel. When you get an email or a phone call from an exec asking for either a gift card or to be able to approve something in a very short fashion. And then this was an example where a supplier lost 37 million because he got an email, have to act very quickly, completely looked authentic because came from the same phone number. Now, this is where we are today, and then enters Gen AI. Like generally, we are all technical people, and I know we all are critical and cynical just because we work in the industry. And there's a lot of hype around Gen AI, and I know I have made fun of blockchain and NFT in the past, the same stage. Having been spending time with what Gen AI can do, my assertion would be that it is not overhyped. If anything, this is underhyped. And the reason for this is that this is the first time that I can combine the scale of the volumetric attack and the sophistication and the intelligence of the social engineering and low and slow attacks into a single motion. You have heard of the bunch of tools, the Microsoft Value. It's not publicly accessible yet, but in 3 seconds, I can take your voice and convert that into something which I can play. So imagine the grandparent scam where I have to learn a little bit more about you and then figure out what's the next step. I can now completely automate the process. There are other websites today, Speechify, 11labs.io, $5 a month subscription for you to be able to try out how easy it is for you to take your voice, record it, and then have any text being replayed in your voice. The second one, which is a Wall Street Journal reporter, she created a voice. She mentioned the bank, JPMC. They had voice biometric when you call customer support. She was able to fool that with just $10 of investment. And then she created her fake video avatars through different websites and had video calls with her family members, and they couldn't tell the difference. There is ChatGPT, and there is something called, as an example, like I said, most of these attacks, they start with a message, and then I have to continue working with you for a month or so to build the trust. I can now essentially completely automate that. There's a tool called LoveGPT, which allows you to, it creates first fake accounts across all the dating websites. Then it uses the ChatGPT to be able to create my profile and my picture. Then it scrapes through all the data of the different profiles and then start a connection, an introduction, and then continue that for a long time without human involvement. Deepfakes are not there yet. They're going to come in, but you can see the advancement in that technology. And the only reason I believe that we are not seeing more attacks today is because the access is not there and because they're costly. But if we have learned anything from history, the cost is only going to go down, right? If you go to huggingface.com and look into the different types of models, you can actually download a specific vertical small models on an edge or on your mobile device so that it will become a commodity in the next year or two. What do we do about it? Where do we go from here? Like there is the first step, of course, is the education and the evolution, which is why I said, if you think this is a hype, I think you're underestimating what this potentially can be done. And the first step is to be able to start putting the guardrails. Like I'm not qualified to talk about regulation, so I won't go there. But there is definitely a need for us to put the right guardrails so that I know whether or not I'm interacting with a human or an AI. ChatGPT, for instance, if you try to create a phishing email, it will tell you that you should not be allowed to do this. At the same time, there is something called Fraud GPT. So ChatGPT is $20 a month subscription. Fraud GPT is $10 a month subscription. And if you look into their website, the primary focus they say is, how do you write spam mails? You can almost imagine how my expense report looks like by subscribing to all those services. The second logical argument is authentication, and I'll touch upon that a little bit. And then you need to augment that with the passive signals so that you're not protecting just the entry door, but across the entire journey of the customer or the end user to look for signals that gives you an idea that this is suspicious behavior. Now, there's one place I slightly kind of disagree with overall our strategy that we discussed in the last 2 days around authentication. In my mind, if you are a large B2C websites, you're not going to find an authentication solution that will fit across your customer base. There is enough diversity and heterogeneity in your customer base that each exception eventually end up becoming a use case. There are pros and cons for each of these methods. I can do email verification, very cheap, costly, cost-effective, but many times people use the same password for your site than for your email. I can use SMS, different channel. Of course, it's expensive. I have SMS toll fraud. I can use push notification, but I'm limited to only the people who download my application. I can use passkeys, makes complete sense, but at the same time, not for everyone. I ran into this guy at lunch today. He said, I'm a rock climber, and I do not have fingerprints. So Touch ID never worked for me. You have plenty of people who are uncomfortable by doing biometric, and you can explain them that the biometrics are only used to unlock the private key and an asymmetric key pair on a website. They will never get it, which is why if they are paranoid about using biometric, they will be very uncomfortable using this method, which is why my point is that you do need to, if you are a B2C website, you do need to have a combination of enough strong auth methods to be able to cover your population, because you need to cover your whole population. The fraudsters only have to attack a subset of your population. The other part I talk about is just overall the passive signals that you should be collecting. Anytime you interact with my website, I know your IP address. I know you're coming from a Tor node or not. I know whether or not you're coming from a bot network, you're coming from a data center, you're coming from a VPN. All those are signals. Anytime you interact with my website and you try to create an account, you give me your email address, I know whether or not it is coming from a burner domain. I know whether or not you have email tumbling or email aliases involved, and that gives me another signal. Same thing goes for phone. I can figure out it is a prepay or a postpay. I can figure out whether the porting happened a day or 2 days earlier. I can figure out whether or not this is a voice over IP phone or not, and then I can use that data to get a little bit better understanding, all passive without having any interaction on active or giving any signal to the fraudster that I'm collecting all this. Continuing on the same thought process, I can actually do device fingerprinting. It's whenever the fraudsters try to run in volume, most customers today, for instance, have some kind of a velocity checks, and they do some kind of an IP reputation. So it's very common for a fraudster to randomize when I'm running a 10 million request, and it's very easy for me to say that the same IP address, same device, same browser, same location, and I'm going to block it, right? And you generally have WAF rules in the front to be able to block that. This is why they randomize it. But I can essentially detect behind the scene that this canvas fingerprint does not make sense for this OS, this screen resolution does not make sense for this device. There are multiple math functions each browser supports to tell me whether or not this is a real browser versus a headless browser. Same thing goes for behavior. I can use touch, gesture, mouse movements, a variety of things to be able to detect whether or not you are a human versus not. Each of those signals by itself are critical and important. And if I am able to triangulate them together into building and identifying the patterns and attach that to my active authentication, active strong authentication, this is what I would need to build to be able to protect my system end to end, and the 3 points I mentioned. Every time a person comes into your website, you can classify them into 3 categories. I know you're a good user because you have given me enough signals, or I have enough signals to know that you are a bad actor trying to have malicious intent, and then you have the gray area in between. And the job of this community and this industry and people that we have on the expo floor is altogether to reduce that gray area. The more I can reduce the gray area, the more signals I can collect to be able to classify my users much better, the faster speed I can deliver, and the faster and more protection I can give to my end users, which eventually results into trust. Coming back to kind of where I started, the focus of us have been to reduce the friction without knowing that at some point of time, I may end up also reducing and lowering the defenses for the bad actors. And the goal for us and my kind of thought process behind this session is that while we are all continue to build the authentication and strong identity protocols to protect the good users and improve those metrics, we should not lose sight of the metrics that the other side of the company or the fraudsters are building, and what can we do to essentially collaborate the two. And if I say my kind of 3 takeaways would be that the attacks of volumetric and social engineering are going to get combined as a result of generative AI. My second one would be that you need a combination of active authentication and passive authentication to protect your site end to end. And my third would be that if you're waiting for a perfect authentication strategy, That's not going to happen, and you need to kind of get started now. So progress is much better than perfect, and the time to get started is now as compared to let me wait for another 60,000 hours to build the next generation protocol. What we have is enough to get started, to at least protect against the attacks that we see now. On that note, I'm going to say thank you for your time, and I hope you learned something in the conversation, and happy to stick around for questions.
Ashish, unfortunately, we are out of time, so maybe those of you with a question, please follow up with Ashish during the break. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.